we're going to explore something that affects nearly everyone who's ever sought help for their mental health or even just wondered if they should. It's about labels, diagnosis, these words we use to describe human suffering. And here's what I want you to know from the very start. You are not a diagnosis. You are not a collection of symptoms. You are a human being living a human life that is uniquely yours, filled with meaning, with struggle, with relationship, and also with possibility. Now, that doesn't mean that diagnoses are useless or harmful. They have their place, but somewhere along the way, I think many of us, we have forgotten that a label is just a map and not the territory itself. And today we're going to explore that territory together. Whether you are someone who's been in therapy or someone considering it, or even you're also another professional like myself, I hope that this conversation helps us see mental health care in a more human way. Because at its heart, therapy means meeting another person in their struggle and walking alongside them. So let's explore this together. So let's start with the obvious question. Why do we diagnose at all? In modern mental health care, diagnosis serves several practical purposes. It creates a common language among professionals. It helps insurance companies decide what to reimburse. And it also gives researchers a way to study patterns of suffering. And yes, for many people as well, receiving a diagnosis can be profoundly validating. It's that moment of recognition, of finally being seen, and that can be deeply healing. The humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers understood this need to be understood. He wrote about the profound relief that comes when another person truly hears us. And sometimes a diagnosis is part of that hearing. It says, you are not alone, others have walked this path, and what you're experiencing is real. But here's where it gets complicated, because diagnosis, by their very nature, reduce the infinite complexity of a human being into a category. They take your story, your relationships, your history, your cultural context, your spiritual aspirations, and also your day-to-day struggles, and they compress it into a code in a manual. The existential psychologist Rollo May actually warned us about this. He spoke of the danger of treating people as objects rather than subjects. When we see someone primarily through the lens of their diagnosis, we risk missing the person entirely. We see the depressed patient instead of Susie, who's grieving her mother's death while trying to raise 3 children on her own. We see the borderline instead of Andy, who's learned in childhood that relationships are dangerous and is now struggling to trust. In Islamic psychology, there's a beautiful concept called fitra, and this is the innate pure nature that exists within every human being. This original wholeness, this essential dignity, doesn't just disappear because someone is suffering, but when we lead with diagnosis, we sometimes forget to look for that light, that essential humanity that remains intact even as the person is experiencing pain. Now, I'm not saying diagnoses are wrong or bad. In certain aspects, they are practically helpful and sometimes even necessary. But I want us to hold them lightly, like a tool we pick up when needed and set down when we don't, not like a rope that ties us to one particular label. Let's get specific. When does diagnosis actually help? First, it helps when it opens doors to treatment. If you need medication for severe depression, or if your insurance requires a diagnosis for therapy, then yes, that label serves a purpose. It's a pragmatic necessity in the system we have. Second, it helps when it connects you to community. Finding others who share your diagnosis, whether that's autism or bipolar disorder or complex PTSD, that can be incredibly powerful. There's research in positive psychology showing that social connection and belonging are fundamental to well-being, and sometimes a diagnostic community provides that. Third, it helps when it offers a framework for understanding. Some people find relief in reading about their diagnosis, in recognizing patterns, learning coping strategies. Knowledge can be empowering, but here's when labels start to hurt more than they help. They hurt when they become your identity. I've heard of cases where clients introduce themselves by saying, "I am borderline," or "I am bipolar," "I am stressed," "I am anxious," "I am depressed." Not "I have," but "I am." The diagnosis has consumed the person. In existential terms, they've let the diagnosis define their being in the world rather than recognizing it as one aspect of their current experience. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and founded logotherapy, he wrote about the human capacity to transcend our circumstances. Even in the most horrific conditions, he observed, humans could find meaning and maintain their inner freedom. When we over-identify with a diagnosis, we give away that freedom. We forget that we are more than our current struggle. Labels also hurt when they are used to dismiss or invalidate. How many people have been told, "Oh, that's just your anxiety talking," or "you're just being borderline right now." The diagnosis itself becomes a weapon, a way to avoid actually listening to what someone is saying. In Rogerian terms, this violates the unconditional positive regard that's essential for healing. And here's something we don't talk about enough. Labels hurt when they are wrong. Misdiagnosis is more common than you might think. I've heard of cases where clients are diagnosed with depression who were actually experiencing grief. Clients labeled with personality disorders who were responding quite naturally to ongoing trauma. Clients who were told that they had treatment-resistant depression who were really experiencing spiritual crisis. The Sufi tradition has long understood that spiritual emergence can look a lot like psychopathology. The dark night of the soul, the dissolution of the ego, the questioning of meaning. These are part of the spiritual journey, not necessarily symptoms of mental illness. But in a purely medicalized model, we pathologize what might be growth. So what do we do with all this? I think the key here is discernment. Ask yourself, is this diagnosis helping me understand myself better, or is it limiting how I see myself? Is it opening possibilities or closing them? Am I using it as a tool for healing or as an explanation for why I can't change? And if you're working with a therapist, pay attention to how they use diagnosis. Do they see you as a whole person who happens to be struggling, or do they see the diagnosis that happens to have a person attached to it? Because the truth is, the relationship matters more than the label. This brings us to what I think is the heart of the matter, what therapy actually is. There's a prevailing model in our culture that treats therapy like, taking your car to the mechanic, right? You are broken and the therapist fixes you and you drive away. But that's not how healing actually works. We don't just heal in that, put a plaster on it kind of way. Carl Rogers spent decades researching what makes therapy effective, and what he found might surprise you. The single most important factor, it wasn't the therapist's theoretical orientation, it wasn't whether they used cognitive techniques or psychodynamic interpretation, it was the quality of the relationship. Specifically, according to Rogers, these three things: the therapist's genuineness, their unconditional positive regard for the client, and their empathic understanding. So, in other words, and I'm probably going to get, pushback for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. In other words, healing happens within a relationship, not through diagnosis, not through techniques, but through real, genuine human connection. Martin Buber described this as the I-thou relationship. When I meet you as a complete person, not as an object to be analyzed or fixed, something sacred happens between us. You feel truly seen, and in that seeing, transformation becomes possible. And the research in positive psychology also backs this up. Barbara Fredrickson's work on positive emotions shows that it's often through warm, trusting relationships that people begin to broaden their perspective and build new resources. Connection doesn't just feel good, it's also actually therapeutic. Also, in Islamic tradition, there's a concept called suhbah, and that is spiritual companionship. It's the idea that transformation happens not through isolated effort, but through being in the presence of someone who reflects back your highest potential. A good therapist, in this sense, is a kind of companion on your journey. Not someone who knows the way and drags you along with it, but someone who walks beside you as you find your own path. Max Scheler, the phenomenologist, offered a beautiful insight about love that applies directly to therapy. He described love as a movement that helps another person realize their highest values and potential. When I love, and yes, therapeutic care, or any form of caregiving for that matter, is a form of love. So when I love and care for my clients, I'm not imposing my vision of who they should be. Instead, I am helping them see and move toward the values and possibilities that are already within them. A therapist who truly serves their client doesn't say, "Oh, here's who you need to become." They say, "I see who you're becoming and I'm here as you grow into that." Now, I want to be clear. This doesn't mean therapy is just friendly conversation. Therapists have training, we have skills, we have knowledge, we understand trauma, we understand the neuroscience behind it, the attachment patterns, and the cognitive distortions. All of that matters, but we hold that knowledge in service of the relationship and not the other way around. I might recognize that you're experiencing symptoms of depression, but what matters more is that I'm here with you in your despair, helping you find meaning even in the darkness. Frankl wrote that suffering ceases to be suffering when it finds meaning. A diagnosis doesn't provide that meaning, connection does, relationship does, and being witnessed in your full humanity does. Think about the times in your life when you felt truly helped by someone. Was it because they gave you the right diagnosis? Or was it because they really saw you, listened to you, believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself? So if you're someone who's gone to counseling or been in therapy, or you're considering it as we speak, here's what I want you to take away. You have the right to be seen as more than your diagnosis. You have the right to a therapist who treats you as a whole person with all your complexity, your context, your culture, your spirituality, and your story. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Questions like, how do you see my diagnosis? How do you think it fully captures what I'm experiencing? How will this label affect our work together? A good therapist will welcome these questions. They will hold diagnosis as one tool among many, not as the foundation of your relationship. And if you're working with someone who seems more interested in your symptoms than your story, who treats you like a collection of problems to be solved rather than a person to be understood, you are allowed to find someone else. You deserve better. Because when we feel safe, when we feel seen and valued, our awareness expands. We see more possibilities. We build more resources. But when we're reduced to a label, the opposite happens. We narrow, we contract, we become less than we are. From a humanistic perspective, you are the expert on your own experience. The therapist brings expertise in psychological processes, but you bring expertise in being you. And therapy works best when that's honored. Now, I also want to speak directly to my colleagues here for a moment. We got into this work, most of us, because we wanted to help people. I know this firsthand through speaking with budding undergraduates about their motivation for enrolling in psychology. We saw suffering and felt called to ease it. But somewhere in our training, in the demands of paperwork and insurance and evidence-based protocols, we can lose sight of why we're really here. We're here to be human with another human, to offer our presence, our understanding, our genuine care. Yes, we need to know diagnosis. Yes, we need to understand psychopathology. But let's not forget that these are tools in service of connection, not substitutes for it. Every person whom we encounter is on an existential journey, whether they know it or not. They're wrestling with questions of meaning, of purpose, of connection, and of their own identity. Our job is to honor that journey and not to reduce it to a diagnosis code. Let me bring this home. Mental health care is at a crossroads. On one side, we have an increasingly medicalized model that treats human suffering as a series of disorders to be diagnosed and treated. On the other side, we have a growing recognition that healing is more complex and more relational and more human than that. I believe we need both. We need the rigor of science and we need the wisdom of lived experience. We need diagnosis when they serve people, and we need the humility to recognize when they don't. But most of all, we need to remember that behind every diagnosis is a person with hopes and fears, with a history and a future, with the capacity for growth, for change, and for meaning making. You are not your anxiety, you are not your depression, you are not your trauma. You are a human being having a human experience, and that experience includes suffering, yes, but it also includes possibility. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Your struggles are not just problems to be treated or done away with. They are part of your story, part of your becoming. And when they are met with compassion and understanding, they can be sources of profound growth. So whether you're seeking help or offering it, I invite you to hold labels lightly. Use them when they help, set them aside when they don't. But never ever let them obscure the fundamental truth, and that is that every person is worthy of being seen, heard, and met in their full humanity. So thank you for being here with me today. I hope that this conversation has given you a way of thinking about mental health, therapy and what it means to truly help another person. If you found this helpful, I invite you to like, share, subscribe, and press the notification bell so that you don't miss future conversations like this one. I also want to invite you to watch my video on the 6 dilemmas of life, where we explore what existential psychology is and why these ideas matter in your everyday life. If today's conversation resonated with you, especially the parts about meaning, freedom, and being fully human, then that video will give you practical tools for navigating the deeper questions we all face. Thank you again for being here. Take care of yourself, and remember, you are so much more than any label could ever capture.